Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest in the webinar today entitled Writing Research Proposals for the National Pork Board. My name is Dr. Chris Hostetler, and I'm the Director of Animal Science here at the National Pork Board, and that's one of the areas within science and technology. So a few housekeeping items to begin with. First of all, I've put everyone on mute as you came into the meeting room today. So if you do have a question for me, please enter that question in the lower right-hand chat box that's located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and I will try to answer those questions at the end of the webinar today. Also, I am recording this webinar, and so we will make that recording available to people who are not able to join us today. And we'll post that up on our research webpage, the same place where you got the link for this webinar today. Well, I was pleasantly surprised with the turnout. I haven't really counted all of the attendees today, but it looks like we're well north of 60 participants today. That's a great turnout for a webinar. And I see that there's a nice mixture of both established researchers as well as researchers that we've not funded before. I also noticed that there is a nice mix of not only investigators but also administrative types that would work in the grants and research office for different institutions. So I appreciate your participation and interest in today's webinar. So why are we doing this webinar? Well, the Animal Science Committee at the National Pork Board reviews and evaluates research proposals that are submitted to us and in response to our request for proposals. And that group of individuals commonly bumps up against some issues that really result in that proposal not being completely evaluated. So we thought there might be an opportunity to, number one, explain the kind of how the process works from our organization standpoint, and then to give you just a few do's and don'ts on submitting proposals. What is it that those committees see on a regular basis that could possibly be changed so that proposals can receive a full evaluation? So these are the topics that I will cover today. First of all, I'll discuss the organizational structure of the National Pork Board, how we're funded, and then how we establish our research priorities within the various areas of science and technology. I will touch briefly on do's and don'ts, those things that the committees like to see on proposals and those things that are often missing from proposals. And so I will touch on that briefly, but if your intention was to sit in on this webinar and really get a good idea of what it is exactly that the committee is looking for, I think that there are some documents that we have, and I'll highlight those in a little bit, that do a much better job than I would be able to do in a 35-minute presentation. I'll also go through the process of how proposals are reviewed and how they're selected for funding. And then once proposals are funded, kind of what happens next in that process. And then finally, I'll end the time today with just a brief overview of how we go about monitoring projects once they've been funded, and some dissemination of that information. How do we get those research results out there to our producers? Because ultimately it's all well and good to do research for the sake of doing research, but in our particular instance we are really after getting information that the producers need in order to have a more profitable enterprise on the swine side. So that's an overview of the presentation today. The National Pork Board is structured around 15 pork producers that form the board. These members are elected from pork producers around the United States. They represent a diverse demographic. They're elected at our pork forum meeting that we hold every spring. And they're elected from delegates that come from all different states to vote on the business of the swine industry. Now, really, the Pork Act of 1985, that was part of the Farm Bill in 1985, laid out the purpose of the National Pork Board, and that is to promote, educate, and do research. So those are really our three things, and if you think about it, it matches up and aligns quite nicely with the land grant mission, which is to educate, research, and do outreach. And so we line up with that sort of sentiment and mentality. At that delegate meeting that we host each spring, they have an opportunity to vote on the amount of money that is put into the checkoff. Currently, the checkoff rate is 40 cents for every $100 in value of a pig that is sold. And we really collect that money at the packer level, and then the packers remit that money to the National Pork Board. We're slightly different in our structure and how we disperse money than some of the other commodity organizations that you may be familiar with, in that we are a top-down structure. So that money comes to the National Pork Board, and then we return a portion of that money back to the state organizations. Those are our sister organizations that really are responsible for the local or the grassroots efforts around promotion, education, and research. But currently we're at 40 cents for every $100 in value, and that allows us to fund those three areas. We do operate with a strategic plan. That strategic plan came into place in 2015, and it will take us through the year 2020. And that strategic plan is really centered around people, planet, and pigs, and doing the right thing for those three entities. Within that strategic plan, then, we have three major goals. Those are to build consumer trust, drive sustainable production, and grow consumer demand. And as you think about that, the Science and Technology Department would primarily operate in the goal of driving sustainable production. Of course, this 15-member board can't do everything that the Pork Board does. They simply oversee that effort. And so they do that by disseminating that money where producers see fit. So this graph that I've got here in front of you shows kind of how that money is divvied out. Domestic marketing is our demand enhancement area, and they get about 28% of our 2017 budget. If you see that 38% is overhead and administration, that's actually not quite right, because about 20% of that, of our overhead and administration, is taken up by that money that is returned back to the states. And so that's substantially less. But over there in the forest green color, you see that science and technology is represented at about 11% of our overall budget, annual budget. And this really doesn't vary very much. It tends to be somewhere between 10 and 13%, depending on what emerging issues we might have to address. But about 10 to 13% of our annual budget is invested in research. So the board, the 15-member board, they kind of oversee how the money is invested. Within science and technology, we have 6 standing committees. Within the National Pork Board, there's a total of 9 standing committees, but 6 of those standing committees fall in science and technology. And I've got those areas that those committees work in on this graphic, but animal welfare, animal science, swine health, pork quality and safety, sustainability, and producer and public health are the 6 main areas where those committees do work. So let me just tell you a little bit about the committee structure. Those committees have between 18 and 22 producers, pork producers on that represent those committees, and they are not generally your typical, what you would think of as a traditional pig farmer. While there are some producers that are represented here on that would be a very small scale production or purebred production, a lot of these members of these committees have PhDs, DVMs, or master's degrees, and they truly appreciate the work and effort that goes into conducting research. And so they're not your typical, what you would think of as typical pig farmers, but rather in general they are people that are interested in research and investing their money wisely. The purpose of these committees is to really set the direction for research efforts. Not only do they identify big research goals that fit within our strategic plan, but they also identify and approve the research priorities within each of those areas. They then select proposals for funding and then monitor those proposals and help in the dissemination of the results. So how are those research priorities established? Well, there's at least 3 mechanisms by which research priorities can be established. One of the things that we do is we monitor emerging issues, and we address those emerging issues from for the National Pork Board. But from a strategic standpoint, the committees are really involved in developing research programs that last anywhere from 5 to 7 years. So the committee, once they've established that area of research, the standing committee then could possibly come up with the research priorities underneath that area. So for example, the Animal Science Committee has worked for a long time in the area of feed efficiency, and so the standing committee has established those research priorities and approves them and updates them as necessary. It could also be a subcommittee that operates within that standard committee of producers that would come together and talk about those priorities. Ultimately, they need to be approved by the standing committee before they are then used in our calls for proposals. We also have the ability to call together a working group. Generally, working groups are convened for a specific task, to address a particular issue then is left up to our task force. So we might call together a working group that is specific to a very specific area of research, and we would ask them to develop the priorities for that specific area. If it's a task force, we really think of those in terms of a longer engagement. So the task force may meet, 3 or 4 times over the course of a year or 2 to address a specific issue. So this is much more issue-based. But within that task force, they could also develop particular research priorities. And again, ultimately, it's that standing committee within science and technology that is responsible for approving those priorities, crafting them into a request for proposals, and then sending that out for proposals. So once we've established those requests for proposals and we send them out, we recently sent one out, I think October 3rd or 4th. That's the one where this webinar was announced on. What are your first steps? What are the first things you're going to do? Well, we commonly see evidence that the request for proposal has not been read. So I would highly recommend reading the request for proposals. And I've got the web address there where you can go to read the request for proposals. On that page, it contains the deadline. So this is my first don't for you, and that is don't miss the deadline. That's the #1 guaranteed way of getting your proposal overlooked, is to never actually get it submitted. So don't miss those deadlines. Operate plenty of time in advance to allow your grants folks to process the information and walk that through the system. Also on that web page, you will see the request for proposal categories. So, for example, Animal Science has a nutrition one right now. The Animal Science Committee is actually interested in nutrition, reproduction, genetics, and management practices. So those are our areas of focus that we have, but we currently only have a request for proposal out for swine nutrition. So I say that because not only should you read those areas in which you think that your research will fall, but you should read the other request for proposal in other categories as well. A lot of times we do a cross-committee collaboration on research efforts. A most recent one was that we worked in the area of heavy pigs, heavy market pigs. That collaboration involved the Animal Science Committee, the Welfare Committee, and the Pork Quality and Safety Committee. And so you may overlook, if you're working in that area, you may overlook that request for proposals because it actually falls and is being sent out by a different committee. So look at all those request for proposal categories. And then also on that page is a listing of staff. And this is my first really thing that I would recommend that you do. And that is to contact those staff members. We actually put our contact information on there because we want to be contacted by you. This is not a black box process. We want to know what it is that you're thinking about submitting for our request for proposals. We want to be able to answer any questions that you might have in regards to our request for proposals or address any issues that you might have. And so I would highly recommend and encourage that you contact those staff members in those areas and if you've got questions or comments. Secondly, there is, again, to read the instructions, and I would recommend that you read those instructions carefully. We often get proposals where there's evidence that the instructions were not read or followed. And so I suggest that you read those instructions. On that page, if you scroll down towards the bottom of it, you'll see instructions and format. And basically that's a document that you need to click on and download that document, because that will provide the format for your entire proposal. So it's got the different fillable fields as a Word document so that you can fill those, and then when you go to the application website, which is that point number 3, that's the website where you will actually go to apply. You can just copy and paste out of that Word document and put it into the proposal area. So the other thing that's located on that particular page, the application page, is up at the top. There is a tab, and it's over on the right-hand side, and it says Tips to Improve Chance for Funding. I am not sure how many people click on that, but within that Tips to Improve Chance for Funding tab, there is a document there that really goes into great detail about the do's and the don'ts of submitting proposals to the National Pork Board. And really the purpose behind that is to get the best possible proposals that we can submitted to our request for proposals so that our producers get a chance to see those the best possible proposals. On your side, the purpose of that document is to really give you an idea of what it is that the producers are looking for and how to strengthen your proposal. Sorry about the center part there, but what are our to-do list? The first is a clear, concise proposal. Oftentimes we see proposals that are ambiguous, and so to have a clear, concise proposal is important. Make sure that you've checked the grammar. Make sure that you don't have any cut and paste errors either in the proposal from if it's a resubmission or if it's a proposal to a different organization. And really evidence that you've covered all of the available literature for that particular topic. And I guess we don't really necessarily are not asking for an in-depth literature review, but you need to be show evidence that you understand what's been done historically in that area. Also, provide supporting results when you reference them in a submitted proposal. Make sure that you provide those results within the body of your proposal. The third item there is a clear explanation of hypothesis and objectives. So clearly state those. Bullet points work really well in this particular case, so call out your hypothesis and your objectives that you're testing. Also, statistical power analysis. Actually conduct a statistical power analysis to determine your treatment size. That's one of the things within the Animal Science Committee that we often find ourselves discussing, is whether or not the treatment size is appropriate, and if there's no power analysis that's been conducted, the proposals are often downgraded because of that. So do your power analysis, do them correctly, do them on the most highly variable metric that you're going to measure so that you get the right statistical power. Trial design, of course, is extremely important. Make sure you observe the experimental unit is the pen or animal. Make sure that you have all your treatment groups and the number of animals within those treatment groups. All of that is important as well. And then, of course, using appropriate animal for the particular trial. So, you know, make sure that it is not only sometimes we bump up against this in the area of vaccine treatment where there may be a rodent model that's being used. So clearly define why that rodent model is being used. Sometimes it is simply an age group difference, so make sure that you have the appropriate age group of animal being under treatment that would fit your objectives. And then the last thing there is to contact your staff members. So I've already talked about that, but really we have an opportunity on the front end to talk with you about your ideas for a research proposal and to really give you some feedback about where we think that might fit into the committee's thinking. And so, again, encourage you to contact your staff member within that area. So what should you not do? The first thing is to omit budget detail. So while we don't request a full budget justification like we do, like you typically would see within a USDA or NIH budget, we do require budget detail, and so omitting budget detail is a red flag for us. If there's evidence of poor understanding of previous work in a topic area, including awareness of our National Pork Board funded projects, then those proposals are often discounted because we don't want to be repeating projects that we've done in the past. At this point, I will tell you, too, that if you've never been to our research webpage, you should visit our research webpage within pork.org. There's a tab over there that says Research. You can click on that, and then it will take you to our research webpage. and you can actually search our projects that have been done in the past and find out whether or not your idea has actually been done before. Hidden behind forgot to upload is make sure that the numbers match across your budget as well as within your objectives and project goals. So numbers of animals should match from one area of your proposal to the next, and oftentimes that leads to ambiguity. Our producers don't really know if you're using 250 animals or if you're actually only using 100 animals as it says in the budget. So make sure that you're very clear and make sure that those numbers match across those areas. Lack of focus on the RFP is another area that we commonly see. A lot of times we will receive requests for proposals that do not match or a lot of times we'll receive proposals that do not match the request for proposals. Doesn't match with the objectives of the RFP, and it's not something that the committee is interested in funding. It could be a great idea for research. It could be an area that is important to our producers, but if it's not in the request for proposals, it's not very likely that it will get funded. So again, make sure that the proposal that you're submitting to us matches up with that request for proposals. And then, of course, don't forget to upload the information. That's another way to get your proposal so that it's not considered for funding, is to forget to upload the proposal itself. So at one point in time, I was a faculty member at South Dakota State University, and so I have an appreciation for writing proposals. And I will say that I think in many ways our proposals are more challenging to write than a proposal for another funding agency, albeit our format is not nearly as long and it's not nearly as in-depth. But really it's a challenge because you have to write for a scientific review as well as for a producer review. So you're writing for two different audiences within the same document, and that can be challenging. So just to talk with you a little bit about the scientific review, we have 3 reviewers. They're your peers within your field that you're working. They're subject matter experts. Generally, they have not also submitted a proposal into the pool. Generally, they do not come from the same institution where there are proposals submitted from the pool, but we do review the proposal by 3 reviewers. They provide critiques and comments, and really their goal is to ensure scientific validity. So they need to make sure that the numbers are appropriate, that the control and treatment groups are appropriate, that the objectives can be obtained with the methods that are outlined in the proposal. So that's the purpose of their review. Once they have completed that, we turn that over to our producers for their review. So the producers take the comments from the scientific reviewers and their scores, and the producers review the proposals themselves. And they look for them from the standpoint of aligning with the request for proposals. In other words, is this something that we wanted to see, and is this a proposal that addresses the priorities that we have set forth? They also review the proposals for overlap with other projects. So what have we done in the past, or what are we currently doing? So is there overlap there? Also overlap from other agencies. So is there an effort going on in the USDA right now where there would be overlap with this particular research project? So We don't necessarily want to, we want to work in parallel with the USDA so that we're not overlapping in those efforts. So USDA doesn't want to pay for things that we're already paying for, and we don't want to pay for research projects that the USDA is paying for. The third item there then is industry application. So it may be a scientifically sound and valid research project. It may address improving a particular nutritional efficiency. But if the industry won't be able to apply that information at the end of the day, it's likely to get a poorer score. So you really have to sell the point in your application. You really have to sell the point that this will address a specific issue that the industry has. And then finally, there is industry impact. And industry impact is really talks about the breadth that this information, that the results will have across the industry. So, for example, our top 20 producers in the top 20 largest producers in the United States produce about 90% of our pigs. But we don't want to do projects that would just benefit them. We want to do projects that will benefit all producers in the U.S. So that other 80% of our producers that are producing the remaining pigs. So the breadth of the industry impact is what the producers are reviewing. So what does a timeline then look like? I just wanted you to, the reason I bring this up is I just want to give you an idea of the amount of time and effort that goes in from the time a request for proposal comes out until you are informed whether or not you've been funded. So our request for proposals are sent out, as the general call is sent out in early October. It's usually got a deadline of mid-November for the deadline for submission. Proposal review then takes place in December and January, and again, this is a two-stage review process. The scientific reviewers usually get this by December, and then the animal science or the committee, producer committee, gets the proposals for their review by January. And then we meet together as a science and technology committee in mid-February. We call that meeting our unified research meeting. That's an opportunity where we get together with all of the committee members, each of the committees within science and technology. We get together under one roof, and we primarily during that meeting is when we do our proposal review and selection. So we'll discuss each proposal. Again, there's 3 committee members that evaluate each proposal, a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary reviewer. They are responsible for leading the discussion around that proposal and then leading the discussion about whether or not to select that proposal for funding. So we do our proposal selection in mid-February. We'll usually notify our researchers by March that they have been successful or not. So notification comes in March. If your proposal is not successful in funding, there's a couple of things here. First of all, you will get back the scientific comments as well as the committee feedback on that proposal. I would highly recommend, unless we specifically say we don't want to see this proposal again, I would highly recommend using those comments to reshape the proposal so that it more closely matches what the committee is looking for. So again, this would be a great time to contact your staff member. When you contact your staff member that's leading this area, don't say, you know, why wasn't my proposal funded? You approach it in a way that you're interested in resubmitting this proposal and how can you strengthen that. And we'll be glad to work through that process with you. If you are selected for funding, that's great. You'll get notification in March, and then usually our goal is to have our contracts established by May. The National Pork Board, for the administrative people, the National Pork Board does not pay overhead, so we don't have a provision whereby we can pay overhead in these grants. But we do fund in 3 different installments. So we fund 1/3 of the payment of the grant is at the initiation or when we sign the contracts. 1/3 is at the progress report, and then the final 1/3 is at completion of the project when the final report has been approved and accepted. So it's kind of the timeline for those research proposal contracts getting in place, and then how we fund those projects. We do have a couple of, well, that's our general call. We do have a couple of other funding opportunities. Say the committee meets in February and they decide that they didn't get the proposals that they were interested in, or they decide that they want to work in a little bit different area. So maybe we only received proposals for 3 of our 4 priorities. So they may hold back a little bit of money out of that February meeting, not invest it all in that research, and then put a spring call for proposals out. I think that comes out usually in March or April, with a selection at the end of July. And so that's the second time a year that the committee actually gets together. The committees get together is sometime in late July or early August. And usually at that meeting, unless we're doing proposal selection, the committee is really planning for the next year. So that's when they do more of their strategic planning. That's when they establish their research goals and objectives for the upcoming year. And then they begin to craft those research priorities into a request for proposal. So that would be our spring proposal period. We could also send out a special call for proposals. If we have a particular issue that arises, we could send out a call for proposal at any time in the form of a special call. I think back a couple of years ago when we had porcine PEDV virus that was affecting the industry, and we put out a special call for proposals to get research in that area. And then we could send out a targeted call for proposals, and this would be a RFP that's for a very specific area. Generally, it's only one research priority or one very distinct area, and it's probably very limited to those individuals or institutions that actually could send back a proposal that have the capabilities or abilities of addressing that particular issue. So that's a targeted call for proposals, and again, this can come out at any time. So while we have the general call for proposals as our main way of getting out an RFP, we do have several other mechanisms. I would encourage you, if you are not already on our listserv for receiving notifications, you can sign up for that yourselves on pork.org/research. There's a location, there's a link there to follow to get registered for that so that you receive our request for proposals. So then how do we monitor these research projects? Once they're in place and you guys are doing the research, how do we monitor those projects? And again, I would say after your project is funded, I would encourage you to contact your staff member and just let them know that your plans for initiating the project, when you're going to start the actual work on it, and that sort of thing. And so become familiar with your staff member in that area. We do have 2 formal reports, the progress or preliminary report, If it's a one-year project, that's usually 6 months into the project. If it's a 2-year or more research project, we may have you do multiple preliminary reports. We may have you do one every 6 months or so. And then, of course, the final report is ultimately the conclusion of the research project. And the final report comes to us as staff members. We review that project and the results of them. We make sure that the stated objectives have been met and that the conclusions are supported by the research results and that sort of thing. We also monitor the projects through presentations at scientific meetings. So oftentimes you'll see us at these meetings, and we'll try to hear it either as an abstract presentation or through a poster. We'll try to monitor the progress of the research projects as they're going on. And number 4 there is campus visits. Campus visits are a great way to tour the facilities where you're doing the research projects and to sort of become familiar with faculty members, not just faculty members that are currently conducting projects, but faculty members that may be interested in submitting proposals to us. We can talk about our current research efforts and our research priorities and that sort of thing. We also like it as an opportunity to meet with graduate students. Graduate students tend to be the ones that are actually conducting the research trials, and so talking with them really gives us an idea of the progress of those projects, but also gives us an idea of the students' level of training, so that when they go out, they have an impact either in the industry, pork industry itself, or in academia. So finally then, how are these results shared with the pork producers across the United States? Well, really we leave that up to you to share the scientific publication in a peer-reviewed journal or in an abstract form. That's really up to our investigators and to share that in that mechanism. We then use those research results to generate some producer-facing publications. So this could be in terms of our research website. So again, we post our research results on our website. It could be in the form of a Research Reviews newsletter, and I think many of you have signed up to receive that newsletter. It's an e-newsletter that goes out. We also produce a printed publication called the Pork Checkoff Report, and a lot of times we will report the results of research projects in that in layman's terms. Fact sheets are important, as well as infographics, so these are much less lengthy versions of the research reports, but really any way that we can get that research information disseminated out to our producers is important. We also do dissemination of results through producer events. That could be at the state level, at the annual meeting for the pork producers in that state. It could be at the Pork Academy, at the World Pork Expo. So there are different producer events that we could use the research results in. And finally, social media. We've got a digital strategy team here at the National Pork Board that helps to craft the messaging around various efforts, and so social media would be another outlet for that. So just to summarize today's webinar, we talked about how the structure of the National Pork Board and how that structure really goes about setting our research priorities. We did talk a little bit about do's and don'ts, but again, there's a document that we've got on the application website that very specifically outlines that. We talked about proposal review and selection and that process that surrounds that. And then what happens next, either what happens if your proposal was not selected and you need to revise that proposal and resubmit it, or what happens if your proposal was selected for funding and the downstream effects there. And finally, how we monitor those research projects. So with that, I would gladly entertain questions, comments, or thoughts back. Again, if you've got something that you thought of, please enter it in the chat box down on the right-hand corner, and I can address those at this point. I've had a question. Yes, this webinar has been recorded, and it will be made available on our website, probably within a day or two. Probably not yet today, but by the end of the week, I would say that we would have that posted on our website. I'll also post the PDF of this presentation so that people can get to it in the presentation form. Let's see, another question here. With regards to submission of proposals under a special targeted call, we do need to submit through the website. Yes, so that is generally through the website unless there is specific or special instructions to submit them directly to the director in that area. So generally it would be a website submission, just like you would a general call for proposal, but in the case of the targeted call that's currently out there, that has been asked to submit directly to a director, and so put it through in that mechanism. Oh, a really good question from a person. I'm taking it as north of the border, but it says, are Canadian academic institutions eligible? And the answer to that is yes. We're open to any applications from any nationality, any country, as long as it has application within the U.S. swine industry. We're currently funding a large research project by George Foxcroft out of University of Alberta in the area of improving sow lifetime productivity. And so we do accept those research proposals from other areas. We encourage that. But again, it has to address the National Pork Board's request for proposals and the strategic plan. Let's see, other questions. The question here is, will we have an opportunity to reply to reviewers' comments, or will it be just revising it? Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that the best way to do that would be to, when you resubmit the proposal for consideration again, is to very distinctly outline the critique and then your rebuttal to that critique. That's your best option for replying to reviewer comments. We generally don't have you reply to the comments and then reconsider that proposal for funding at that during that call for proposals. You have to wait until the next call for proposals in order to submit it. I think that answers that question. Let's see, another question. Is it necessary that a research partner from US be included in the proposals? Does it improve the chance for acceptance? And the answer to that is no. We don't require that you have a research partner from within the US included in the proposal. Does it improve the chance for acceptance? And the answer to that, again, is no. I think that as long as your call for proposal, as long as your proposal has application to the U.S. industry, I think that those would be considered the same way, and we would not look at that differently regardless of the collaborators or partners that you have on that proposal. Another question here is the scoring the same for producer's review and scientific review? And the answer to that is yes, although they have different categories in which they score. So it's the scientific review scores on a scale of 1 to 5, and the producer review scores on a scale of 1 to 5. But the way that they're evaluating, and therefore the categories, are different for each of those two different reviews. So here's a question that has to do with our letter of intent. What is the selection process for the letter of intent? And I've actually never done a letter of intent. I know that our human nutrition area does letters of intent, and I, to tell you the truth, do not know that. If you send either myself or Adria Shield-Brown an email, I can find that information out for you, how they evaluate and select those letters of intent. Sorry, I was not able to answer that question for you. Do proposals need to be exactly matching the priority area? I would say that they need to be very close to the priority area. I hope I gave you the idea that the priorities are really established by the pork producers themselves. These are, every morning when they walk out into their barns, these are the issues that are facing them and that they're struggling with finding tools to deal with. And so if your proposal does not match the priorities, I don't think it would get scored very well. And so I would say the more that you can match those priorities, I think the better off you are. Especially if there's multiple priorities within a given call for proposals, matching that would matching multiple priorities would be especially beneficial. Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions that have come in from the audience. Thank you all very much for participating today. I greatly appreciate your time. We greatly appreciate the proposals that you submit to us at the National Pork Board. I think that we have one of the best developed proposal process of any of the commodity groups, and so I think we do a lot of things right from our organizational standpoint. I hope that today you have found it useful as you prepare proposals, either for our current call for proposals or for proposals that you prepare in the future. I hope that you find this information useful. Again, I will have the recording of this and the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation posted on our research webpage. And with that, thank you and have a great afternoon.